Hello, I'm Montse Alvarado. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
I fought with all my strength as a priest and as a victim, first against abusers, and as a priest so that at my level these things do not happen again, that things move forward, and that the church change.
A survivor shares his struggle as a major report is released about widespread sexual abuse in the French Catholic Church, a call for massive change and support for those who have suffered. A surprise development in the historic Vatican finance trial, a victory of sorts for the defense in the embezzlement and fraud trial of Cardinal Angelo Becciu. Will explain.
Justice is a very difficult term. What the families of the murder victims desperately need, in my experience, is healing.
A window into the last moments on death row. A lay chaplain who has ministered to inmates for decades shares his take on the death penalty. And we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, a deep dive into the robust Catholic faith Latinos bring to our church community and how their strength in numbers has become the backbone of the Catholic Church in America. EWTN News In Depth is next.
It's appalling. Victims abused and attacked. The church's silence. The failure to report abuse. The fact that victims are not believed, that they are left unheard. No reparations or trials. Priests simply reassigned. This is, of course, unacceptable.
A priest, himself a victim, speaks out after a major report is released detailing a shocking level of clergy sex abuse in the French Catholic Church over a period of 70 years. Hello and welcome to EWTN News In Depth, Controversy in the Church, an alarming report in France, plus developments in the historic Vatican finance trial and a ruling in a sex abuse court case involving altar boys at St. Peter's. Those troubling and difficult discussions lead our program this week. We have reaction from the Pope and top clerics, plus analysis from EWTN correspondents closely monitoring these cases.
Aux personnes qui ont été victimes de tels actes de la part de prêtres, de religieux, de religieuses.
First, France, where the president of the Conference of Bishops this week publicly expressed his shame and asked for forgiveness for the church after the release of an explosive report about sexual abuse. An independent commission sponsored and paid for by the French Catholic Church spent 2.5 years investigating allegations and found that more than 300,000 children had been molested by priests, monks, deacons, and Catholic laity since 1950. Of the estimated 3,000 abusers, the report says 2/3 were priests. The commission based its findings on the testimony of 240 people and more than 2,000 letters. 80% of the victims are boys, most between the ages of 10 and 13. Thousands of French adults are now dealing with the fallout of what happened to them as children.
First, I didn't know it would have an impact. Once I said it to my parents, then the priest was changed, was sent somewhere else, and I thought that it was all over, because we never talk about it. But in fact, this trauma was inside me.
With the release of the devastating report, Pope Francis said he was saddened and pained that the Catholic Church in France had been unable to protect children from abuse. At his weekly general audience, he expressed his shame that the Church had not put this issue at the center of its concerns and called on the clergy to continue working to ensure such situations are never repeated. Solene Tadie, European correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us from Rome to discuss the wide-ranging impact of this report. Solene, what has the general public reaction been to this report in France? I can imagine this is beyond discouraging.
Indeed, the release of this report has caused an earthquake in the whole country and beyond. Of course, it is perceived as a trauma. Indeed, the figures are overwhelming and they have left Catholics worldwide in a state of shock. In France, specifically, Catholics from all backgrounds are expressing their disgust. But there also seems to be a feeling of relief at the same time because they are convinced that this step was necessary to put an end to these crimes that have destroyed the lives of so many people, thousands of people, and it has been disfiguring the church for so long. People outside the church, of course, are often more violent in their reactions, denigrating the whole institution. But it is also an occasion for religious authorities to act in order to restore the bond of trust with the whole population.
And I think we've already been seeing some of these public actions in asking for forgiveness and requests for reconciliation. So then what are the consequences of these findings for the French Catholic Church? The Independent Commission accused the Church of cruel indifference to the victims. Is there any indication of what might come next for those involved in abuse or who helped to hide it?
Well, for now, the report claims that for a very long time, the Catholic Church's immediate reaction was to protect itself as an institution. And the Commission clearly said that there can be no question of turning the page. So they made that very clear. They said that the future cannot be built on denial, and that recognition and responsibility are required in order to make progress. And I see that the bishops welcome this decision. The president of the Bishops' Conference of France, Archbishop Éric de Moulin-Beaufort, said that he didn't expect the figures to be so high, but that's the time for naivety and ambiguity is over. He made that very clear as well. So there seemed to be an awareness on the part of the church leaders who have understood that they cannot afford to let these crimes be allowed to continue. Of course, the credibility of the church is at stake, and there are going to be further development in the coming months, of course.
And the many lives and souls that are at stake, right? This report, just to clarify, I think it's really important to remember, the report was requested by the Catholic Church. And sadly, it only represents a fraction of general abuse cases in France. Should others be learning from the Church's example and actively shedding light on this problem?
Yes, you're right. It is a very, very important element of the report because it has highlighted the fact that sexual violence against minors is a widespread scourge throughout the French society. In fact, the report confirmed that the vast majority of these abuse usually take place in the family units, as we can expect that. But most importantly, it also revealed that over the same period of time, 70 years, there were approximately 140,000 cases in public schools only. The president of the commission, his name is Jean-Marc Sauvé, he said that there is an average of 100,000 to 200,000 cases for each institution that they studied. So it's huge. It shows that there is a phenomenon that has been terribly underestimated in all spheres of society in recent decades. But little by little, the code of silence is being broken. The problem is that also in the 1970s and 1980s, many famous politicians, philosophers, who are still very often seen on television right now, have openly advocated pedophilia, notably in a famous opinion piece published in 1977, signed by dozens of them, and they demanded very clearly that sexual relationships between adults and children be made legal. So the French also understand that there is still much to be done in many institutions, starting with the church, of course, because it's normal. The church has to set an example. That's right. Very clear.
Definitely a moral example that needs to be set and one that's necessary, as this is a pernicious global problem. Finally, the report has 45 recommendations about what should happen next. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, the Commission has made several proposals to the French bishop that include several things, very different on several levels, including listening units for victims, reforming canon law, recognizing crimes committed, whether or not there are statute bars, greater prevention in seminaries, meaning before ordinations, clearly, a more efficient training for clergymen, and a transformation of church governance. It's not really clear what is meant by that, but they also recommended a financial compensation for each victim. The bishop have welcomed these proposals and should take new measures in the coming months. In the meantime, the president of the Bishops' Conference said that the seal of confession will not be questioned, which is a very important point that will be debated in the coming months in France.
Well, Solene, we'll be coming to you for more information about this as it develops. Thank you so much for being with us.
With great pleasure. Thank you.
The high-profile Vatican finance trial of Cardinal Angelo Becciu and 9 other defendants took a dramatic turn this week. A panel of 3 judges ruled on Wednesday that prosecutors must redo part of their investigation into the embezzlement and fraud case and hand over missing evidence to the defense. That evidence includes video of interviews with the former key suspect turned star witness for the prosecution, Monsignor Alberto Perlasca. He signed off on parts of the €350 million London real estate purchase at the center of the trial. The Vatican lost millions in worshiper donations in the botched real estate deal. Becciu is the most senior cleric in modern times to face trial for alleged financial crimes. Senior Rome correspondent for the Catholic news agency, Hannah Brockhaus, has been covering the Vatican fraud trial as it's been unfolding. She joins us now from Rome. Hannah, it's great to see you. What's motivating the additional investigation into Monsignor Perlasca's testimony? What do the judges hope to uncover?
Well, obviously, it's a very important testimony for the prosecution. We don't know yet what he said in those interviews that he did. That will obviously come out in the trial when the prosecution presents its evidence and then when the defense has a chance to respond. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what is contained in there. The prosecution has been kind of reticent. They've kind of waffled. They've said, oh, no, it's fine, we'll turn it over. But then they hadn't done it yet, and the judges had to order them to turn over the video footage. So people are wondering what Monsignor Perlasca says, if it could be incriminating also for other people, why the prosecution has been reticent to give over that evidence to the defendants.
That's a very interesting point you make about incriminating other people. Should then this trial be a source of hope for the laity in terms of transparency, or will this be a one-off occasion for those entrenched in the curia who are themselves corrupt? Will this give them pause, or will this just continue business as usual?
I think that question brings up a really good point because there is a lot riding on this case. It could be a point of hope for all of us, and we'll have to just see how it turns out. Obviously, this trial will show the effectiveness of whether the court can enforce the laws. Pope Francis has made a lot of changes to the Vatican financial law in the wake of all of this scandal coming out. So this will be the test case to see if the Vatican court can follow through. And then obviously that could send a message as well if there are others who aren't touched by this case, but just send a stronger message about the future reforms that they will be enforced.
And that's right. Pope Francis has made a lot of changes and Vatican law has changed. And we did a lot of coverage on the changes to the Book of Penalties. So this case, which did spark major reform of how Vatican finances are handled, can you explain a little bit more about how those changes have come into effect?
Well, obviously, they've gone into effect behind the scenes. The Vatican is doing a lot of things regarding finances. They've issued more statements with financial statements and put in place more controls and hopefully put more oversight into financial management that will help prevent problems with just people taking advantage of the Vatican, of its money. So hopefully going forward, those things are already there. Now it's a matter of prosecuting what has happened in the past.
A matter of application. Well, Hannah, we've also been watching another major trial at this Vatican court this week, this one involving alleged abuse among altar boys and an alleged cover-up. This case just wrapped up on Wednesday, and both defendants were cleared of their alleged crimes. The abuse allegedly happened at the Pius X pre-seminary, a residence inside Vatican City for about a dozen boys aged 12 to 18 years old who are considering the priesthood. The boys serve at papal masses and other liturgies in St. Peter's Basilica. And while the pre-seminary is on Vatican grounds, it is run by Opera Don Folci, a religious organization for the formation of priests, which is based in the Diocese of Como. The case involved 29-year-old Father Gabriel Martinelli, accused of molesting his slightly younger roommate at the pre-seminary where the boys were teens. And the former rector of the youth seminary, 72-year-old Father Enrico Radice, who is accused of covering up the crime. Both have asserted their innocence of the charges, and again, both have been cleared of these crimes. Hannah, can you explain why each priest was cleared of their charges?
Yes, well, judges found both priests to be absolved of some of the charges against them. But they did also say that effectively they do believe that there was some sexual activity going on, but because the two boys were both minors at the time in Vatican law, that they couldn't find it to be a proven case of abuse. So that was kind of where the case ended up then. They were absolved. There was also a problem with statute of limitations, and effectively they were both absolved. They also said obviously the priest they didn't find any absolute proof that he had covered up anything.
So there is this difference between sinful activity and abuse. This case was brought to light by a former student, right? A kind of whistleblower?
Yes, it was a former other altar boy who was part of the pre-seminary, came forward first to the media several years ago, and that's what kind of started this case going. In fact, actually, Pope Francis had to issue an override to the statute of limitations just for this trial to take place, because as Vatican law was written at the time, it was already past the statute of limitations. So that student, former student, brought the case again to the light of the media and to the Vatican, and the trial took place after that.
And this pre-seminary that was located on Vatican property but is managed by the Opera Don Folci religious organization for the formation of priests, initially, was there confusion about whose jurisdiction the pre-seminary fell over?
Yeah, absolutely, because this Opera Don Folci is actually run by the Diocese of Como in northern Italy. And so it came out in the trial that maybe some students had reported something to various personnel, whether at the pre-seminary or at the Vatican, but originally people weren't sure who was responsible for looking into the allegations of abuse. Whether it was the Diocese of Como or whether it was the Vatican. And so there was some delay for that reason. About this alleged eyewitness of the abuse as well during the trial, the judges said on Wednesday that his testimony had a lot of conflict in it, and that was part of the reason that they came to the conclusion they did, and the ruling they did, is because he was the only one who alleged to have been an eyewitness to the abuse, and then they found just a lot of discrepancies in his testimony.
Last quick question. This pre-seminary has since been moved off of Vatican property. Why?
Well, it may be because of this trial, and certainly the timing does seem to indicate that could have something to do with it. They also said that the new location of the pre-seminary will just be closer to where the boys have classes. Now, obviously, they'll have to go further to get back to the basilica for when they do serve at papal masses and things of that sort, but they'll be closer to some of their other activities. This may also then free up the building on Vatican property for other uses in the Vatican. We'll have to see what happens there next.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for breaking this down for us.
You're welcome.
Coming up, a look to the future of the Catholic Church, a future that will be impacted by Hispanics, the largest ethnic group within Catholicism. But despite that strength, large numbers are leaving the Church. Next, what can be done to engage their hearts and minds? A deep dive when EWTN News In Depth returns.
If we want to continue to make the people feel welcome, there have to be more priests from within the Latino community in this country.
One way is vocations. Later, we talk to a Hispanic priest about why the U.S. needs more priests like him.
Welcome back to EWTN News In Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. The Hispanic community is a large, diverse, and vibrant part of the Universal Church. As we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, we take a look at the religious shifts of this community within the Church, both in the U.S. and in Latin America. In the United States, the percentage of Catholics who are Hispanic is on the rise, while the number of Hispanics who remain Catholic is on the decline. I know that can seem a little confusing, so let's break it down. According to a national study of Catholic parishes with Hispanic ministry by Boston College and the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, some 25% of Catholics were Latino in the 1980s. That number today is closer to 40%. But when you look at the Latino community in the U.S. as a whole, the percent of them who are Catholic is declining. Some 67% of Latinos identified as Catholic in 2010. Today, that number is just 55%, according to the Pew Research Center. In Latin America, Latinos are also leaving the Catholic Church. 2014 data from the Pew Research Center shows that Catholics in Latin America dropped by more than 20% since the 70s, while evangelical Protestants grew. Alejandro Bermudez, Executive Director of EWTN's Catholic News Agency and Así Prensa, joins us now to give us his perspective on the factors contributing to the Catholic parishioner decline in Latin America. Alejandro, it's so great to have you here. Let's talk about this decline of the shared values with the church in Latin America and how it's showing serious political consequences. How is the abortion march or the pro-life march in Mexico last week a manifestation of this?
Well, the numbers, as you mentioned, Montse, are there. You know, they are absolutely real. But there is a different interpretation of what that means for the Catholic Church and Catholics in Latin America. The bottom line is that being a Catholic was a cultural thing for Latin Americans all over the place, you know, from Mexico to Argentina. And for many, what is happening right now is that the culture is challenging Catholics to show if they really are Catholics and believe what the church believes, or if they are just cultural Catholics and are not going to stand for the principles that the Catholic Church defends. So in the March for Life and for women that we had in Mexico, it was about 1 million marchers across all the different marches that took place in the main capital cities in Mexico. Just in Mexico City, there were 300,000. Now, I think that shows that this is a crucial moment for the church in Latin America, in which, led by lay people, by lay Catholics, you have a smaller number, but a far more committed number than in the past. Catholics will assume that everybody was Catholic. They were not they were not making any difference in society. And now that we have to confront a massive way of secularization, there is a big divide between those who want to stand and become real serious Catholics and those who say, like, nah, I'm just going to go baptize my kid and that's it.
That's right. And this secularization you speak of has real consequences. Abortion is legal in Cuba. It was recently legalized in Argentina and in some states in Mexico, to name a few countries. And changes to the definition of marriage are also on the rise. Is this a consequence of this change in Catholic affiliation and belief you mentioned?
Yes. But it works in a circle. You know, the most the society secularizes, the more Catholics start leaving the church. So you can see that especially with younger generations as they go to college and they go to universities, including so-called Catholic universities. They are taught that abortion is almost a sacrament. You know, they are not told about the sanctity of the unborn life. They are told only about the so-called right of women. Same with the redefinition of marriage and sexuality in general. You know, with the gender theory. So only those families that are willing to stand and be serious, organic Catholics, you know, and say, okay, I'm going to be Catholic not only because I go to Mass on Sunday, but because I believe that the teachings of the Catholic Church need to be applied in society, you know, for the betterment of society. Those are becoming a minority, but are becoming a very, very serious, vocal, organized minority.
And it's going to have a lot of effects. So let's go down the map to South America. The collapse of openly Catholic Latinos is particularly strong in Brazil. The Data Folha Institute estimated a drop of 40% since 1970, going from 90% to 50% of the population. What is contributing to this drop in the faithful in Brazil? Wasn't this the first place Pope Francis visited as the World Youth Day country host?
Yes, and the problem in Montse, to be completely honest, is an awful Catholic leadership. Awful Catholic leadership. And just to be very brief about it, look what happened at the Synod for the Amazon and the disaster we saw there with the Pachamama, with a total redefinition of what Catholic means. That's the church in Brazil. That's the leadership of the church in Brazil, to the point that many Catholics that are 100% faithful to the Catholic Church feel more at home or closer to evangelicals, many of whom are, dramatically anti-Catholic, but they feel more comfortable with evangelicals, hanging around with evangelicals, that they feel hanging around with their bishops and their leaders. So, St. Vincent de Paul said, horrible priest, terrible faithful. And if that goes all the way up to the bishops, that's what you get.
That has great impact. So leadership is important. Last question for you. How meaningful is it for the church in Latin America, or the Spanish-speaking church in general, to have a Latino pope 8 years into his papacy?
It have definitely touched a nerve in a positive sense. People are more willing to listen basically to the testimony of the Holy Father when the Pope has traveled to Latin America, and the fact that he can communicate all the time informally in Spanish is something that have had a tremendous impact in reviving the devotion of Catholics. But devotion is not a problem in Latin America, Montse. The problem is formation. We need a serious catechesis, so Catholics that have a great heart for the church also have a great mind to pair with it.
It seems formation is definitely the name of the game, and with the Eucharistic Congress, we're all trying to revive this true understanding of the Eucharist and the belief in Jesus Christ. Thank you so much, Alejandro. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Likewise, Montse.
As we told you a few minutes ago, the Catholic faith among Latinos in the United States is a paradox. We turn now to Vicente del Real, the founder of the burgeoning apostolate Izcalli, an organization dedicated to evangelizing young Hispanics. Gracias por estar con nosotros, Vicente. It's really beautiful to see that you founded a brand new apostolate, Izcalli. Tell us what it is and what it does.
Yes, Montse, Izcalli is a ministry that hopes to respond to the huge need for evangelization for first and second generation Latinos that are U.S. born. As you know, 50% of the Catholic Church is Latino, and we need to respond and serve this growing generation.
And what is this word Izcalli? What does it mean?
So, as you know, Montse, Our Lady Guadalupe spoke to Juan Diego in his native language, Izcalli. Izcalli is Nahuatl, is the language that Our Lady Guadalupe spoke to Juan Diego, and it means to grow. So we have given the word the meaning of to grow in Christ, guided by the Holy Spirit.
This is an indigenous dialect in Mexico, right? What is the most surprising thing that you've learned about first and second generation Hispanic Catholics in the United States?
Well, first of all, it was very interesting to me in the beginning to see that parishes were trying to do Hispanic ministry for immigrants, right? So I'm an immigrant myself. I arrived here when I was 15, and they were trying to respond to the need in Spanish. But as a matter of fact, most of the young Latinos in this country are U.S. born, and they go to school in English. They articulate their ideas in English. And they also articulate their faith in English. So one of the things I noticed right away was that there was a huge need to respond, not necessarily to the immigrant population, but to respond to the children of immigrants and, reach out to them and speak their language. And that many times is English, The culture is different. But it is very important that we serve them in the language they speak.
Well, let's lean into that a little bit. You're a Mexican Catholic yourself, as you mentioned. How is that different from the experience of native-born American Catholics and how you live and express your faith?
Well, first of all, I think for us, my experience has been that we thrive in community because as you know, one of the core values of our culture is family, right? Family is our first community. So when we are put into an intentional community that we can call second family, we thrive in our faith. I think we need to create spaces where young Latinos can feel in community. We need to create spaces where young Latinos can have a personal encounter. And we need to make sure that we speak to that reality. I feel that, it's the same Lord, it's the same faith, but we do need to be intentional about creating spaces where they feel acknowledged and welcome. And honestly, spaces where they can be themselves.
And what is it in your ministry that young people are responding to? Is it access to the sacraments? Is it an encounter with Jesus Christ? What is that beautiful piece that you're seeing?
So we are a charismatic movement, right? So we focus on the charisma. We want everybody to have a personal encounter with God. After they have a personal encounter with God, we put them in a small, intentional discipleship communities, because now they have to learn how to be disciples, right? So that's the core of our ministry, creating a space in the church where young people can have a personal encounter with God and then learn how to be disciples that can go and then turn the world on fire.
The caring and the feeding of the faith, not only through emotional and spiritual conversion, but through intellectual formation. In that intellectual formation, how do the children of immigrants differ from their parents in their understanding of the church, not just church hierarchy, but the church in general?
Yeah, I feel that the younger generation has a lot of questions, right? Yeah. The faith of my parents is a very devotional, very beautiful faith. But growing up, I have questions. I'm like, who is God? Who formed God? And sometimes when the first generation is asked this question, they are intimidated by the fundamental, essential questions about the faith. And I feel that the younger generation, we need to be able to respond to the profound questions about the faith. Why is the church? What is the purpose of the church? Why this? Why that? And I feel that my parents, for example, they didn't necessarily have these questions. They, they received the faith. They live the faith. A very devotional faith, a traditional. But they don't necessarily have the fundamental questions that some of us had growing up. And I feel that for young Latinos, to be able to engage with them in the intellectual side of things is very important.
Vicente, you're talking about all of the different things that young people put into question. What are the major challenges facing Catholic outreach to Hispanic youth today?
To be honest, I think the lack of resources. We are 50% of the church, and there are not many apostolates that are being intentional about reaching out to young Latinos. And when we began our apostolate, we look for people to partner with, to learn from. And we look across the country and we said, we must respond to the call of Our Lady of Guadalupe that she gave to Juan Diego. It must be you. And we listened to her voice and said, it must be us. We need to go out. We were not and we are not experts, but we just have a burning fire for God, for Jesus, for Lady Guadalupe. And I think the biggest challenge is resources. And I'm going to tell you why. I have never seen a generation that is so hungry for authentic relationships. I have never seen a generation that is so hungry for an authentic space of encounter to know God. And this is a generation that knows that is broken. We just need to create spaces where they can have something real, something authentic in their lives.
Well, we're going to be praying to Our Lady of Guadalupe for those resources that are so necessary for the growth of the church. Thank you so much, Vicente.
Please do. Thank you.
We will continue this discussion about Hispanics in the Catholic Church with a look at Hispanic clergy in a few minutes.
During my time at Facebook, I came to realize a devastating truth. Almost no one outside of Facebook knows what happens inside of Facebook. The company intentionally hides vital information from the public, from the U.S. government, and from governments around the world.
Up next, our Week in Review. Explosive testimony on Capitol Hill. Is Facebook intentionally supporting anger and division online because it helps the bottom line? A whistleblower shares her inside take. More back and forth about the Texas heartbeat bill, the latest court ruling on the abortion law. And the Pope and other religious leaders call for urgent action on climate change. Details when we come back.
A major judicial decision and a presidential one on abortion top the week in review. We begin in Texas, where U.S. District Judge Robert Pittman suspended a state law that bans abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected. The law, which Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed in September, is enforced through private citizens. They can bring lawsuits against the abortion provider and anyone who helps a woman obtain an abortion. The woman herself cannot be sued. After the district court ruling was released on Wednesday evening, abortions resumed in at least 6 Texas clinics on Thursday. But other physicians were hesitant, afraid the court order would not stand for long.
They're still nervous about liability. The abortion industry reports that they are not largely doing abortions on little babies that have heartbeats, because under Senate Bill 8, we specifically put in the law that if a court temporarily blocks the law and that block is then reversed by a higher court, doctor, you are still liable for those abortions you did, for those little lives you took during that period.
Texas Senator Brian Hughes is the author of the bill. He says the state is appealing the federal judge's ruling to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. He's hopeful the federal ruling will be overturned. The Biden administration has reversed an abortion rule that prohibited federal-funded health care providers from making abortion referrals. The new rule for Title X, a federal family planning program, will now allow health centers to receive those funds whether they advise patients on ending their pregnancies or not. The rule is set to go into effect in November. The Education Department has announced major changes to the federal student loan forgiveness program that could mean financial relief for more than 500,000 people. Borrowers working in government and nonprofit sectors like first responders, military members, nurses, and teachers are eligible to have their student debt wiped out after they've worked for their organizations for 10 years and made monthly payments the whole time. Congress created the original program in 2007, but it has been riddled with problems. The overhaul streamlines the loan forgiveness process and makes eligibility requirements more transparent. A rare show of bipartisan agreement on Capitol Hill this week during whistleblower testimony from a former Facebook data scientist. Both Republican and Democratic senators expressed outrage over misinformation on Facebook that content that harms children. Citing internal Facebook research, former employee Frances Haugen told lawmakers Facebook intentionally exploits users' negative emotions, keeping them on the platform longer, making Facebook huge profits. She said, in her opinion, Facebook is dangerous to society and should be regulated.
When we realized big tobacco was hiding the harms it caused, the government took action. When we figured out cars were safer with seatbelts, the government took action. And when our government learned that opioids were taking lives, the government took action. I implore you to do the same here.
Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle appear ready to do just that. However, Facebook vigorously denies Haugen's claims. Executives at the world's largest social network say the company does not place profits over safety. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said the company's internal research is being taken out of context. He said he's particularly focused on making sure Facebook is safe for kids. Yet another tragic consequence from the COVID pandemic. According to a study by the medical journal Pediatrics, more than 120,000 U.S. children have been orphaned in the last 15 months, losing either a parent or grandparent who was their primary caregiver. And the greatest toll has been among Black and Hispanic children. While in many cases, surviving parents or relatives remain to provide for those children, researchers use the term orphan to indicate how many children's lives have been upended. An environmental disaster continues to unfold along the coast of Southern California as an oil spill comes ashore, covering pristine beaches and killing sea life. More than 145,000 gallons of crude oil have spewed into the Pacific after a tear in an underwater pipeline.
It just smelled like death, oil, basically like you were walking through a refinery.
The impact to the environment is going to last years, potentially even decades.
The spill that is causing this disaster is said to be from a rip in a pipeline just 13 inches long. While there is no cause yet, a preliminary report indicates a ship anchor might have hooked the pipeline, causing the tear. Dead seabirds and fish are washing ashore, and beach businesses and tourism have been shut down. We have inherited a garden. We must not leave a desert to our children. That was the environmental appeal this week from Pope Francis and dozens of other interfaith leaders as they signed a joint agreement urging governments around the world to actively combat climate change. The 40 religious leaders say care for the environment is a moral imperative towards future generations. They want the nations to commit to ambitious targets to curb greenhouse gas emissions at a United Nations climate summit at the end of this month in Scotland. Pope Francis is expected to attend. The Pope spoke about the climate crisis with outgoing German Chancellor Angela Merkel in her farewell visit with the pontiff on Thursday. After their 45-minute meeting, Merkel told reporters the pair discussed the influence the Catholic Church could have in the upcoming climate summit. She said they also discussed the future of the European Union and world conflicts. And in talking about the clergy sex abuse crisis, she said she told the Pope she thinks the truth must come out. In Germany, Catholic bishops will extend their synodal way to 2023 after an abrupt end to an assembly session. The meeting failed to meet a quorum following votes in favor of endorsing same-sex blessings and a debate on whether the priesthood is necessary. The German synodal way is a multi-year process bringing together bishops and lay people to discuss power in the church, sexual morality, the priesthood, and the role of women in the church. There are fears this process could lead to a new schism within the church. Pope Francis will attend World Youth Day in August 2023 in Lisbon, Portugal. Organizers made the announcement this week. The event draws huge crowds of Catholics from around the globe. The Youth Jamboree was initially planned for 2022, but was delayed for a year because of the pandemic.
I don't equate mercy with being released. To my mind, mercy is part of our duty when we imprison somebody.
Ahead, after a generation ministering to death row inmates, insights on life, murder, and mercy. A lay chaplain just honored for his years of service shares his reflections with EWTN News.
Special recognition in Rome for a Florida man who has made ministering to death row inmates his life's mission. Dale Resinella received the first ever Guardian of Life Award from the Pontifical Academy for Life last week in honor of his 25 years of dedicated prison ministry. Over the years, as his passion for his work grew, he eventually gave up his law practice to focus all his efforts on inmates. He now also trains other people to do prison ministry and has acted as a witness for nearly 24 executions. From his unique vantage point, he's an ardent opponent of the death penalty. While in Rome to receive his award, Resinella sat down for a discussion about death row with EWTN reporter Colin Flynn.
In Florida, the family of the condemned says their goodbyes in the morning. They have to be done before lunch, and then they have to leave the prison.
I heard you say before that they can sometimes go to a local hotel to watch the local news to find out if the execution has happened or not.
And the local pastor at St. Mary's of McClenny and his successor pastors have made St. Mary's of McClenny available as a quiet, sacred place until I come from the execution at about 6:30 or 7 o'clock if it's on time. Sometimes it goes till almost midnight because they're holding for a decision. And tell them if it went through or if it was stopped, if it was stayed. Now, the family of the victim of the crime does not mix in with the family of the condemned.
Okay.
And that's just good security.
Do they often come to witness as well? Do they want to see that execution?
When I started doing this for the church almost 25 years ago, we're just a couple of months shy of 25 years, it seemed the families of the murder victim frequently came. Mm-hmm. But in the last 10, 12 years, frequently they don't come at all. They're not interested in the execution. They know it's not going to do anything for them. And they'd rather stay away from it and just keep trying to heal from this whole mess.
You don't think it gives them a more sense of justice knowing that the person who murdered or raped and murdered my loved ones is not alive and being cared for somewhere and possibly could be out someday? They're finally gone.
Justice is a very difficult term. What the families of the murder victims desperately need, in my experience, is healing.
When we talk about mercy, it's such an interesting concept. When does mercy begin and end? Because you've spoke so much about abolishing capital punishment and the death penalty, but you would admit too that some people need to be locked up for most of their their lives. But if someone is repentant, if they've committed a heinous crime, should they be released early? How much mercy should be shown?
I don't equate mercy with being released. To my mind, mercy is part of our duty when we imprison somebody to help them find their way to be the person God intended them to be. Now, we can't go back and erase those prior 20 years when they were on drugs and alcohol, and something like 85% of all the horrible crimes in Florida are connected with people being on drugs and alcohol.
And I'm playing devil's advocate, Dale, knowing people watching this will have different opinions on the topic, but you know, the argument that society determines the severity of a crime by the punishment it dishes out, and that having capital punishment in place for, you know, very certain horrible, horrific crimes acts as a great deterrent and therefore saves more lives in the long run.
I've heard that, and there is absolutely no solid evidence one way or the other on the death penalty being a deterrent or the death penalty not being a deterrent. It seems to depend on other factors.
Of course, we have to remember the horror of the people that you are dealing with day in and day out. Murderers, some people who have murdered multiple people, rapists.
The agony that these crimes bring on the families of the victims is beyond words. And of course, what I'm always experiencing is, what if that was my son? What if that was my daughter? It's horrendous. I suspect that if I was ever the one sitting on that couch crying, my raw emotions would want revenge.
For anybody watching this now who is on the fence, undecided about where they stand on the death penalty, what would you say to them?
When my wife ministers to the family of the condemned, and when I'm with them for the goodbyes in the death house the morning of the execution, almost invariably, the mother, the grandmother, the grandfather, the uncles, the aunts, the siblings, they look at us and they say, we never imagined this would happen in our family. But with drugs and guns so available, I mean, it's like water in the States. It's everywhere. A kid who's 19 or 20 years old and goes off half-cocked, next thing you know, they've killed 2 people robbing a gas station, and they've got a death sentence. No one ever imagined it would happen to people in their family. And the question is, if that was your daughter on the gurney, if that was your son on the gurney, what would you ask? And everybody says, I would ask for mercy.
There is much more of this fascinating conversation about death row. You can see Column's complete interview with Dale Resinella of the EWTN social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
There is a great union in the Latino family, which I think is something that everyone can learn from.
Next, we go on the faith journey of this priest. The joy he says he has sharing the gospel with his Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters, and the message he has for Latino families about the future of the Catholic Church in America.
As As we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, we took a look earlier in this program at Latino church membership trends in the United States. As we learned, there's a pressing need for more Hispanic priests. In today's Faith Journey in Depth, reporter Mark Irons introduces us to a father who felt called to his vocation early in life.
Holy, holy, holy. Father Ramon Baez says, according to his family, he'd been thinking about the priesthood since he was 9 years old.
That my aunt asked me, my godmother, what I wanted to be. And she said that I told them that I wanted to be a priest. Now, I don't remember that.
Born in Puerto Rico, his family moved to the U.S. when he was a child. Father Ramon is now pastor of Holy Family Catholic Church in Dale City, Virginia. A predominantly Hispanic parish, he says it's been extremely rewarding to bring the gospel message to his Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters.
Most especially in the sacraments, in the sacrament of confession, people do feel more comfortable when they speak to a priest who can understand in their language. And then, of course, in the Eucharist, to be able to celebrate Mass.
De manera que se conviertan en el cuerpo y la sangre de Jesucristo, Hijo tuyo, Señor nuestro.
A priest for the past 17 years, Father Ramon says celebrating Mass is his greatest joy.
To be able to consecrate the Eucharist and to be able to preach to the people makes my whole day.
And ministering to families in this community comes naturally.
As a Latino person, as a Latino man, I think that I have an understanding of the way that the Latino family functions.
Father Ramon grew up in a large family, one of 7 children. Today, he leads an even bigger church family. And in Catholic communities across America, a need is growing. As an increasing number of Hispanics fill U.S. Catholic churches, there's a problem. There aren't many Hispanic priests. Take a look at the numbers on U.S.-born Hispanic Catholics and priests. According to a report from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, for every 23,000 Hispanic Catholics, there is only 1 Hispanic priest.
Ever since I've been a priest, I have been dealing with this dilemma.
And Father Ramon is calling on Hispanic families to help. He says as more and more Spanish-speaking families are welcomed into the U.S. Church, future priests should come from those families.
You've got to be able to be willing to say, Lord, if you are calling somebody, call from my family. Because otherwise, there's not going to be a Mass in Spanish. And you're not going to be able to be ministered in Spanish. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.
At the school connected to Holy Family Church, Father Ramon is a spiritual father for the children.
How grateful I am that you're here.
They ask questions, he prays for them and blesses them. And his message for parents:
please, when your son comes to you and says, you know, I think that the Lord is calling me to become a priest, okay, value that and appreciate it and pray about it.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
If you or someone you know is considering a call to the priesthood or religious life, you can contact your diocesan vocation director to continue the conversation. Or you can also visit the USCCB website and learn more on the vocations page. And that's a wrap on this edition of EWTN News in Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. Thanks for joining us as we explore issues important to your Catholic life. We'll continue the conversation same time next week. See you then.